SSX Tricky is a cult classic that has fans regularly crying out for a remake. How did a franchise capture the hearts of an entire generation with its second outing? And why, in an era of annual sport game releases, has SSX been absent for over a decade? 22 years later, we look back at this absolute classic and try to work out why it's been 11 years since the last SSX game, and why sports games have never quite been the same since. SSX Tricky came out at the end of 2001. Usually I'd make a light-hearted commentary of the year, but let's be honest, there's only one event that dominates people's memories of that year. A year earlier, the original SSX had released as a launch title for the PlayStation 2, having originally been planned as a Dreamcast title. What a weird world that would have been. Sega and Electronic Arts, however, parted ways, and so the snowboarding title would land on the PlayStation 2, to critical acclaim, even being labelled the best game on PS2 to date. End of story. The origin story is a long one, but quite interesting, so here's the abridged version for now. Steven Rechtschaffner, a former professional skier and program director turned television producer, found himself running out of ideas, and came up with the idea to combine motocross with skiing. He later decided that snowboarding would be a better fit, and out of this unholy union came the sport Boardercross, which incidentally would go on to become an Olympic sport. The concept was simple. Multiple competitors racing to the bottom of a tight course with various types of jumps, drops and beams designed to challenge the rider's abilities. Adding to the excitement was the fact that the tight courses meant competitors could and did collide. Sounding familiar? Some time and a move to Vancouver later,
This is Canada. We only have one road.
and Rechtschaffner would find himself working for EA, helping to develop the cameras for their sports titles, eventually gaining enough success and trust to work on his own side project, SSX. Boardercross would then be used by Rechtschaffner as the basis of SSX gameplay, and dial it up, with exaggerated tracks, loose physics and of course over-the-top tricks, which would complete the arcade-style experience by providing the player the chance to gain a speed boost for pulling off bigger and flashier tricks. Rechtschaffner would also convince EA to create a new label within EA Sports, which would house similar, more experimental titles. Branding for EA Sports Big would be pulled together in a few weeks in the run-up to the SSX release. This new label and direction made sense. The Tony Hawk Pro Skater series had begun to popularise extreme sports in the gaming world. This was helped along by shows like Jackass and the X Games gaining their own popularity, spreading skater culture and an awareness of a broader range of sports and breaking the dominance of football, hand-egg and basketball. Never want to miss a money-making opportunity, EA saw the dollar sign mean opportunity and pounced. Whilst SSX performed well, it's not as fondly remembered as what would follow. The problem was SSX lacked a standout identity, memorable characters or attitude. And then along came Tricky. First off, whoever was responsible for the name or Run DMC track use is a marketing genius. The game had an instantly memorable hook and a clearly defined attitude. The characters became larger than life, epitomised by Coverboy Eddie, but he was by no means alone. You've got the overweight American with a mullet in Luther, an antisocial metalhead, Simon is ready to go. Or you want the small, cute Japanese girl, well, up steps Kaori. Even the cover art became more vibrant and distinctive. SSX Tricky scored a 92 on Metacritic, and is, to this day, considered the snowboarding game by many, and the best iteration of SSX. Everything in Tricky took the SSX Boardercross experience and turned the dial up to 11. Courses were remixed to allow even crazier trick combos, and Eddie's hair wasn't the only thing defying gravity. The tricks became ridiculous, hyping up the arcade feeling of the game and suiting the kick-ass soundtrack and entertaining commentary. Uber tricks were physics-bending over-the-top spectacles, but the Tricky bar encouraged you to try to complete as many as possible, for bragging rights and the infinite speed boost. The adrenaline bar was now also instantly charged by successfully knocking down other riders, encouraging you to engage in road rash-style drive-bys. This was paired with the enemy and friend mechanics, where other boarders would remember your attacks and begin to seek revenge, occasionally engaging in trash talk before or after the race. The trash talk wasn't always particularly inspired, but it was a nice bit of flavour, and the voice actors did a great job complementing these over-the-top characters. By the way, big shout out to whoever cast Lucy Liu for the voice of Elise. I had no idea that was her until I searched IMDb. That said, there are a few problems that can slip past those rose-tinted glasses. The physics, understandably for a game of its time, can be a bit scuffed, but the vast majority of the time they hold up great, and allow you to blast your way down the slopes and fly through the air for obscene lengths of time. The controls also feel a little wonky at times. It could just be my age chipping away at my already limited skill, but it definitely felt more difficult to pull off satisfying tricks than I remembered. That was until I remembered that D-pad was better for tricks and sticks for steering, a minor annoyance to pay for all the fun you'll have the rest of the time. The courses themselves are usually fast and tight, providing plenty of opportunity for close encounters, but also the chance to use the boost and focus on speeding away from the pack. These 8 courses might not seem like many at first, but you can sink hours upon hours trying to truly master them, with each character also having trick books for you to work your way through. And show-off mode has people competing to set new high scores and posting videos on YouTube as recently as 2 or 3 years ago. The game's focus on fun and freedom to be ridiculous is one of the big differences we see compared to the modern sports games, where a drive for visual fidelity has been matched by focus on hyper-realism, arguably at the cost of sheer fun and experimentation. I guess it's time I justify that clickbaity thumbnail and title, huh? Think of the last sports game you played. Maybe a FIFA or Madden, NBA 2K? I'd specify a year, but honestly, does it matter? Even racing games, previously balanced with the sim types such as Forza and Gran Turismo and the more arcade and outrageous such as Need for Speed and Burnout, have in more recent years narrowed, with the market largely dominated by more realistic handling cars and a focus on the inclusion of the latest photorealistic hypercars. Granted, Mario Kart and other Mario-themed sports games are very obvious exceptions to this rule, but Nintendo effectively operates in their own bubble, different in many ways to the larger market. Other smaller studios have dabbled in the sports genre, but they are still dwarfed by the large titles and the dominance of more simulation-styled games. Licensing dominates games like FIFA, where teams and competitions have been signed to lucrative contracts for their branding and player likenesses. Those of you that remember playing Pro Evolution Soccer will remember that as good as the game felt to play, the strange player and club names definitely hurt it. It was during the period of competition in the early 2000s with titles such as Pro Evo where EA was willing to experiment. FIFA felt more arcadey than Pro Evolution Soccer and more regularly implemented new mechanics or modes. This and their licensing deals effectively won them the battle. Titles such as FIFA and NBA Street also brought new experiences. Now that the battle has been pretty much won, EA have swallowed up countless studios that might have once challenged or crushed other titles into irrelevance. Add in that the licensing deals have continued to balloon, and EA have very little incentive to experiment or take risks. Sports games have become iterative, with little if any innovation. Why take that risk? Instead, EA have done EA things, and found ways to squeeze as much money as possible from their franchises, cramming games with microtransactions and loot boxes, with a focus on modes like Ultimate Team which generate more revenue. Up to $1.5 billion in additional revenue in a single year from Ultimate Team modes. It may feel like I'm saying the name EA a lot here, but there's a reason for that. Their stranglehold on this section of the gaming market is truly spectacular. EA even recently lost the FIFA license after 30 years. That's almost as long as I've been alive. But with the market so dominated by EA, they weren't willing to pay the money FIFA were asking for. With little competition, the FIFA license just wasn't seen as important and
King Kong ain't got shit on me!
And whilst FIFA themselves are said to be hoping to create a rival for the future EA title, EA have already secured deals with the Premier League, La Liga and the UEFA Championship, putting any future FIFA title in the same position Pro Evolution found themselves in 2 decades ago. Let that sink in. A video games company has basically outmuscled the international governing body for an entire sport. And not just any sport, football. Which makes it all the sadder that once upon a time, EA took a risk on the SSX series. With its dialed up excitement and focus on gameplay rather than realism, and on fun rather than microtransactions. I'd wager that we all look back far more fondly on genuinely innovative games that tried something new like SSX, Tony Hawk's or Jet Set Radio than we do any of the more recent games. To me, SSX Tricky epitomized this willingness to try something new that made gaming in the early 2000s such a joy. Paired with a banging soundtrack and a larger-than-life set of characters, and the game had a generation of gamers who had never touched a snowboard hooked. The fact that it has never had a remake or remaster probably plays a role in boosting the nostalgia factor. Boosting the game's nostalgia factor further is the fact that the SSX franchise seems to have tailed off, with the last title releasing in 2012 to little fanfare. And whilst it was generally well received, there was a definite move away from some of the silliness and over-the-top nature of Tricky, and other games in the series. Whilst the topic of a remake has come up regularly, there's little likelihood we'll see one or another SSX game in the near future. Unfortunately, from a business point of view, EA are better off financially focusing their attention on proven markets, with recognisable names and star power that they can monetize. Snowboarding has also lost its mainstream appeal. Even skateboarding, arguably the sport that paved the way for so many new sports games, has seen its stock in the game industry fall off. It seems like SSX Tricky is destined to remain a fond memory, responsible for many a mutter of "it's tricky." Honestly, given the recent track record at EA, I'm kind of glad it's this way. That said, Steve Rechtschaffner, the father of SSX, is currently working on a spiritual successor, Project Gravity, with a new indie studio. And whilst it's been quiet for a while, I'll be keeping my fingers crossed for another over-the-top snowboarding experience that will have me wishing my knees weren't one bad tumble away from exploding.